You know what, Doug? Just today, I'm going to try to avoid the "okay, we are live" because it just puts me in this really weird mindset. It's pretty uncomfortable saying the same thing over and over again. So we are, but I'm not going to express it in those terms, and I'm sure the chat will let us know if there are any audio-visual issues. Although that will be, I think, with every successive live stream, the probability becomes lower of that being the case. I don't know.
I mean, my last live
Speak for
stream.
yourself, dude.
Yeah, it just happens from time to time.
It does happen. Once these tail risks catch up, you just get wiped.
Yep.
No, it looks like everything's functioning. So first things first, Happy New Year to everyone who's spending the first day of the year with us. And if you've been here for the weeks and months prior, it's been great to have you. If you're new, well, we look forward to spending Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays in your company. But yeah, there's certainly a lot to look forward to, and we can't avoid making some sort of video about 2021 predictions, as guarded as we tend to be. So that's something we'll discuss today. But nonetheless, hope it was a safe, productive, and somewhat memorable, in one way or another, day, week, period. Duck, that applies to you too. Happy New Year. Hope stuff is okay as far as these things go.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. Same to you. Happy New Year. Same to everyone else. Really, Happy New Year. Hope you guys had a nice kind of celebration, whatever, going into it, as much as you can in these days, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And of course, a quick thank you to Bybit, the sponsor of Technical Roundup, for their support. If you'd like to visit them and support the stream, you may do so via the links in the description below. So thank you to Bybit as the sponsor of the show. You know, with New Year stuff, there's always I think we discussed this even last time, this really weird cognitive dissonance that just because the whatever Gregorian calendar is rolling over from one unit of measurement or whatever to the next, that everything's going to change. And I guess it makes sense to have that, coping mechanism, given how shit the year has been in many regards. And for most people walking the earth, I think it's quite conservative to say. But it doesn't really change much on the ground, right? Even the positive developments that we've had come out towards the end of last year, they need to be implemented. They need to be integrated. If anything, right now, I'm in the strictest tier of the lockdown, so it's not exactly like the accompanying data you'd want to see in part of a rosy image of reversal. It's still, I don't know, get this feeling that not quite out of the woods yet. And it's been especially weird because crypto has been doing so well. So technically, this environment for us and this year has been absolutely amazing. And then you look outside the window and I don't know, it's the contrast and the juxtaposition is still pretty hard to stomach. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Crypto's doing really well, and then everything besides it is just, not. So I don't know. I just hope it's not going to be a reversal on both fronts.
Yeah.
But who knows, right? But I'm positive that it's at least going to turn around towards end of the year.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's also on a slightly lighter front. I don't know how productive you've been the past couple days, but I'm in that point in the market cycle where digesting food is a full-time job. So, and it's also that time when my family just over-ordered stuff for Christmas and New Year in terms of food. So in the interests of the environment and something, I'm just there kind of hoovering up the post-Christmas and post-New Year's excess, just to kind of start the next week or the new year with a blank slate. So it's not like I want to eat all this stuff. I'm just doing everyone a favor by
that's the excuse, huh?
by increasing fridge capacity via my own consumption. So yeah, a couple of naps were taken, and it's been a bit on the slower side for me.
Yeah, for me it's been. I'm moving soon, so got that on the plate. I've been saying that for weeks now, but moving in 2 weeks, and then obviously still family stuff that I have to deal with. So for me, it's been a little bit different, but then again, I tend to be lazy all year round, so can't complain too much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the market it just didn't care, right? We had all-time high break on Christmas Day, and then I think New Year's Day as well. We had a breakout attempt of sorts in Bitcoin. So, I mean, that's interesting, right? The whole benefit of no pauses in crypto 24/7 market, yay. And then even the most kind of holiday of holidays, we have price action that ends up being um, significant. Before we jump into the kind of lower time frame stuff and the moves today and the other stuff we're going to discuss, like the delistings of some of the privacy coins, people have been asking and also publishing like end of year or kind of start of the year predictions for the next year, be it in price or the ecosystem or, you know, where the volume's going to come from, or just anything from a trend, price related or not, that you see in the space. Do you have any kind of controversial hot takes, avant-garde stuff you want to share, or just general 2021 outlook that you'd be comfortable punting?
I mean, in general, like price predictions, I think they're completely useless. Most of them, anyway. I know that it's always nice to talk about; it's always fun, but I think like most of them are completely. I mean, there's no edge there. It's just, I mean, you just pull out a number out of, yeah, basically. So, but in general, like from calls that I'd be comfortable making, I think altcoins are gonna keep underperforming. I mean, I think there's gonna be a bounce this year. But in general, I think altcoins are going to keep going down. And then, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Like, I think Bitcoin is going to do better than the altcoins. And then we'll see. I think I'll go from there. But there's going to be a big bounce, I think, on the altcoins. But that's the one to sell, in my opinion. So, yeah. Pretty not... Like I'm not too positive on the altcoin front, just based on what's been developing. I mean the thing that we're going to talk about later with the privacy coin delisting stuff. I think those signs that we're getting with XRP and Zcash and Monero and all that kind of stuff getting delisted is not necessarily one that kind of pushes people in the direction of altcoins, but if Bitcoin goes completely crazy, I think there's still gonna be a play on the altcoin front. So, yeah.
I can't believe they didn't delist the most eminent and private coin of all, which is XVG. Yeah, of course. I mean, Dogecoin Dark and its privacy features. Wow, I can't believe they let that one slip under the radar. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I agree that for the most part, like price predictions aren't useful, broadly speaking. What I think it will likely be the case during the course of next year, and again, part of the reason is the predictions themselves are absurd, but also timing them is pretty much impossible, and it may become accurate or prescient after the fact, but you know, if you can't take advantage of it, then whatever. But I think there will be a point during the course of this year where it'll just be quite hard to be on the bullish side and be confident, and we'll see a shift at the very least from this infinite bid on Coinbase environment to something that's just a bit more difficult to trade with the same degree of bullish conviction. I don't know whether that manifests in like the old 30% correction or whatever, but I just think a cooling off in that type of environment is reasonably likely, and something I'm prepared for. The resolution of that ultimately may be one of those cases where everyone expects doom and you only get halfway there before it's back to business as usual. And I maintain the view that the all-time high break is like one of the more bullish signals that can be generated in a market. So that's still the background context until proven otherwise that I'll be operating under. But I'm cognizant of the fact that the environment won't always be this generous towards the green candle side, even if the ultimate destination ends up being the same. So, I mean, even just like a meaningful red candle on the monthly or the weekly, or just something that makes people think twice before just employing a fuck ton of leverage on the first bit of long liquidations. I think some development of that nature is very likely. So that's something I'm looking out for. With regard to altcoins, I generally agree that if that kind of environment in Bitcoin continues, that they will underperform. What I do think will be the case is that those traders who do well in altcoins will operate less on the framework of alt season and will operate more on the framework of finding sector specific baskets or instruments that outperform and trade the windows in which that outperformance happens, versus just this laissez-faire, laissez-faire period where any altcoin does very well against Bitcoin and against USD, and you just buy anything and become rich. I think if those windows do happen, they'll be pretty hard to time, because there's a good chance that Bitcoin will be difficult to trade, and you'll just have some mean reverting bounces in altcoins. But I think for the most part, good altcoin trading will just have to be a bit more surgical versus free, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's anything else I haven't mentioned. So yeah, I do expect the bullish side to be hard at some point, or the infinite bid to, people to question their convictions at one point or another. I read a really good thread by CMS Holdings. So Dan, I think, is still in charge of the account. And he mentions that the supply side tends to be more fixed on the Bitcoin front. And it's really the demand side that's particularly volatile, which sounds straightforward, but he talks about some of the mechanisms through mining and inventories, etc. It's a very good thread to read. But as a result, when everything's cyclical to some extent. So when the spot demand and the infinite bid that we've seen even kind of reduces in how aggressive it is, or how many orders want to get filled, etc., that'll likely lead to quite a different environment, because the supply side isn't going anywhere. And I still think on a rally like this, once you get that first big or intimidating red candle, and you kind of look out below to see where there's support, there are going to be some weak hands who won't want to hold the double digit or greater pullback. I think that's it. Bitcoin, yeah. ETH, I've got no idea. I think we'll see how it develops. I honestly have no idea.
With regards to ETH, I'm kind of like, the 2.0 kind of scenario thing, like, that is dragging on and on and on. It's never really taking any shape or form, like anything significant. So I think like I could see some slowing down on the ETH front, on terms on the USD pair. I don't know if that's gonna be because Bitcoin pulls back, or if it's gonna be anything on the ETH BTC pair. The ETH BTC pair looks looks really bad still. So I'm not entirely sure where that's gonna come from, but yeah, I'm not. Fundamentally, it's really hard to kind of judge where this is going, just based on the fact that we've been talking for ETH or about ETH 2.0 for years now. It's still not really around. Like, it's still gonna take a long time. So really hard to judge where that's gonna go with regards to that. But for me, it's kind of like I'm gonna follow the ETH BTC chart the most with regards to, okay, are altcoins strong or weak? And if ETH BTC is weak as one of the stronger altcoins, I know that the other altcoins are not gonna do well. So that's kind of my framework for the altcoins. And then Bitcoin's just been, okay, you treat it as an infinite bid. You don't really have to do much other than just ride the wave. And that's kind of been the way to go. And I think that's going to continue to be the way to go, unless we kind of lose 20K, which I think would be pretty damn bad at this point. But, it doesn't really make much sense to expect it, given we're at 30K.
Yeah, I agree. It's something we wrote about in previous technical roundups, which is where the actual more bullish path isn't a bullish retest of 20K. It's just for the number to go straight up. And that's certainly been the case for the time being. I don't know if you agree with the argument made earlier that when/if that shift in the infinite bid environment takes place, there'll be a period of time, without commenting on the duration or magnitude, etc. If anything, I think the duration may be more significant than the magnitude of some sort of pullback or different environment. That'll make it harder to trade on the bullish side with as much conviction.
Yeah.
Do you see that being the case at all? Because it's not gonna that type of very aggressive environment where any intraday dip gets bought up. It's a sign of urgency, sure, but everything's finite. It's not gonna last forever.
Yeah. For me, what I'm seeing right now, which is kind of starting to get me worried, is that the higher the price is going, the higher the leverage that people are using. Which, I mean, fair, we're in a very bullish market. It's just been moving up. But if you just compound and then take on more risk on each trade, the first one that is going to go poorly can wipe out like a lot of the gains that you've made.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is that some people, like, they've turned like very little into a substantial amount, and they're still trading like they have very little, right?
Yeah,
so that's something that I see all the time. I've seen at least like 20, 30 people that I'm friends with that run up accounts and then get them really, really big and never adjust their risk.
Yeah.
Because at some point, right, if you're like trading a 1K, 10K, like depends on your kind of on what you have in general. But if you're trading like a smaller account, you can trade like, okay, I don't really care if this is gone, right?
Yeah.
But if you run that same account up to 1 million or like even more, at some point you gotta ask yourself, okay, am I willing to give all of this back? And the answer to that for most is obviously not, right?
And they recognize that answer after the fact, right?
Yeah, exactly. You only recognize that after you've lost it, which I've seen in too many people.
Same.
So I hope that doesn't really happen to, like, a lot of my friends seem to be doing it. All over Discord, I'm seeing the same mentality of, okay, yeah, I mean, the moves are big, the leverage has to be big, whatever. I think, if anything, like, the higher your balance grows, the less, I mean, the whole leverage thing is a whole nother story, right? Like, because people are using leverage the entire wrong way.
Yeah.
But even like disregarding that, the bigger your account gets, the more conservative you have to play, unless you just really don't care if it's gone.
Sure.
Because, yeah.
And this is something we see cyclically, right? Like, whenever we have extended periods of like high leverage, massive size P&L posting, even if the underlying trend doesn't change, at a certain point, I think we've seen 2 or 3 cycles now where like distinct groups of traders following that behavior just kind of get wiped, for lack of a better term, right? Straight up get wiped and kind of stop posting the same type of stuff. And that to me is some indicator that maybe something didn't go entirely well in that move. And just to quickly answer a question from Kirill Primakov, who says, do you guys think that institutional buying could prevent a 25% plus dip? I mean, my personal answer is yes, because it has done so, but not forever, probably, is kind of how I view it.
Probably. Yeah.
So I think a lot of the times, and I totally agree with your analysis that you've stated in other places, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, if there have been instances in the market where everything just looked primed to take a huge shit, right? To nuke completely. Yeah. And if you actually talk to traders who spend all day kind of watching the tape, for lack of a better term, they'll tell you this, right? That this thing just looked like a piece of shit, but then it's just this massive absorbing force was more or less visible on the spot books and just absolutely hoovered everything up with no regard for anything else. And I'm very partial to that argument. So do I think it could prevent 25% plus dips? Yes, simply because it already has. Do I think that's indefinite? Probably not. Oh, that would be a very weird world to live in. What do you think?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, in general, crypto is very volatile, right? I mean, right now it's just volatile to the upside. Yeah. And I mean, there's gonna be a time where it's gonna be volatile to the downside again. It's just like, and this is something that I've been stating for a lot of this run, is, I mean, yeah, you're going to get like a big pullback, I think, at some point, 30-40%. The question is when, because if you're like expecting it at 10 or like 15 or 20K, and that's a very different story from like expecting at 40K, right?
Yeah.
Because if it just goes straight up to 40K, you've been expecting like a massive pullback from 20 to 40K. You're not having fun, and then even if that pullbacks comes in, it's not even reaching where you started expecting it, right? So there has to be some sort of safety feature in your mind where you're just like, okay, I think this is gonna come in, but it's just impossible to judge when it's gonna be. And like
especially
I said,
if you're
if
acting
you have
on it, right, as you mentioned earlier, like if you're acting on something that hasn't happened yet, but you think should, is probably like one of the worst trading traps ever, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some. I definitely agree with you that, like, for example, for me, like what I've seen from 12 to 10K, right, that breakdown that we've had in the past, I think that would have been a 40% correction. Like I'm almost certain it would have been, if not for this massive spot absorption coming in. Like, I mean, that was a setup that I've traded a million times during the bear markets or ranging of 2017 to 2020. Those kind of things usually play out the same way. But like I said back then too, like there is some weird thing that's just absorbing everything, and turned out to be Michael Saylor just buying a shitload. And I mean, that's something that you have to be prepared for, right? When you're trading a market that is as small as the crypto market, right? It's the same for altcoins as well. If you have a big player that is interested in altcoin, I mean, TA goes out the window, right? If the market is too small for the player that is coming in, it's just gonna buy it all up. And I mean, the opposite is obviously true as well, right? If you have a huge seller, I mean, that's been the case for XRP, for example, where like everything is super, super bullish, and then you get these bearish news where big players have to actually sell their XRP. Then you kind of get these big, big, big candles to the downside. Yeah, it just makes sense, right? The market is too small to kind of absorb that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, look, I think it's been especially hard for... I mean, it's not been especially hard. It's been especially weird in certain cases. Like, going back to leverage very quickly, and I think this is what Siaki... Sorry, I probably butchered your name there. He's saying, why are they using leverage wrong, right? Or incorrectly? I think generally, when... most people in the crypto space still, despite how easy it is to just use stablecoins as collateral or settlement for everything, most people are still net long Bitcoin, right? So if the market is absolutely printing with you having to click 0 buttons, unless you know you have some sort of edge and you can outperform that, etc., then as the market does better, in most cases, for most people outside of like fully cracked out traders, etc., the impetus for you to do more with your Bitcoin, like buy altcoins or like trade on leverage, I think it should be lower. I know that's like a may not be an agreeable position to everybody, but if the market's doing that job for you, and historically you're probably not in a position to outperform that, then don't try, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So that's really the first thing. So that's why, for example, I took a leverage trade at, we discussed this, right? The worst TA level that's I've ever seen on the chart. Straight up. It's just not support, right? I use this here, this structure here for a trade. And like, is this a level? Does it go back to something? Is it some really impulsive consolidation? Absolutely not. It's pretty much the only red candle that was on any sort of high time frame that I saw, and I used that as support here for a trade. And for anyone wondering the actual like setup parameters, it was an inside day failure setup that I tweeted more or less. So we had this really volatile day on this kind of ugly reversal candle, and then the next day was an inside day, which means the price action of the inside day is contained fully within the preceding day. And in those cases, we map out the low of the inside day and then the high of the inside day as well, and treat it as a range, right? Because again, the fact that it's an inside day is suggestive of less volatility or just a ranging environment, and so we play kind of both sides of it. And so what we had was a spike below the low of the inside day, so that's kind of like a range breakdown, and when that started being bought up, the idea was to take it towards the top side of the inside day. That's about it. But even on a trade like that, entering at like the worst level ever felt terrible, and then exiting that trade as well. You know, I could have held it to higher highs or all-time high, etc., which makes sense. But there's just no reason for me to do that, right? Like, if we're at 30k and still like zero pullbacks and like Bitcoin is just absolutely printing, and I'm unhedged and all that sort of stuff and benefiting from that exposure, there's just no reason, and especially given the risks we discussed with what happens in a lot of those cases, there's no real strong impetus for me to hold leveraged swings when the spot market is kind of doing most of the heavy lifting for me. If you still see like an asymmetric bet, especially on the long side, in those conditions with leverage, I mean, you know, be my guest, and that's certainly the reason for that setup there. But holding it past that, or using it as like, okay, this is the swing trade, I got an entry and I'm going to hold it until 30, 40, 50k, I just think is a bit weird and unnecessary. What are your thoughts on that? And also just generally, why are they using leverage wrong? That point about small account become big account, etc. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I mean, in general, like what you see in crypto for some reason is that people look at their account balance, and I mean, there's always bigger fish, and there's people like posting huge P&Ls and whatever on Twitter, right? So people with like a Bitcoin or two look at Twitter, they see someone trade with 100, and then they're like, oh, I wish I could do that. And then, I mean,
I'm so sorry to drop a Bitcoin or two. It's like 30 to 60k. It's like, wait, holy shit.
No,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But yeah, so like, I mean, even if you have 0.12 a Bitcoin or whatever, right? You see these people post big P&Ls, and then you're like, I want to be like that. So how could you be like that? You could either just grind your way up. It takes years and years if you do it properly, right? Or you can just slide the leverage bar to a little bit more leverage and then just trade with way more than you have with no kind of risk management whatsoever, right? And for some reason, and I mean, I kind of get why, but most people gravitate towards okay, I'm just going to use more leverage to make more money. So they're not using leverage for, in my opinion, the intended purpose, which is you don't want to have too much money on the exchange, because if the exchange goes down, you lose it all, right? And then you don't want to, in general, you want to use leverage to kind of hedge. You want to use leverage. You don't have to use leverage to kind of make your account bigger than it is, because there's a lot of risk involved with that, right? Let's say Bitcoin goes from 4K to 30K and you get liquidated on a trade that you take from 10 to 12, right? I mean, you would have made a shitload of money just chilling, but you had to force something on high leverage because you felt I mean, for some people, it's even like they feel like they deserve more. And then they just use this leverage to kind of make that happen. And then it doesn't happen. They lose what they have. And then, I mean, obviously you go into tilt. I've seen it happen a million times. And I mean, it's happened to me before, way back, where it's just like, oh shit, I screwed this up. I had this plan, I screwed it up. And then you just go even harder, right? And then you lose way more than you wanted to. And it's just a bad way to trade. So I think like that is the way most people, at least from what I'm seeing, are using leverage right now, where they're just like, I'm using ×3 leverage, even if you're talking about that, right? I'm usually using ×3 or ×5 leverage on my balance because that's safe. And then I can make the most out of it. And then they don't think about what happens if that goes wrong, right? Because I've seen people lose their entire account being bullish in a bull market. And that is the saddest thing to see. I've seen it happen from 1 to 20K back in 17. I've seen it happen multiple times from 3 to 14K, where people are mega bullish. And a good friend of ours traded an account from, I think it was like 2 Bitcoin to, I think it was 3-figure Bitcoin, all the way back to 0, being bullish in a bull market. And I mean, you don't want to be one of those, right? And the only way you can make that happen really is like if you're bullish in a bull market and you're losing everything, is just by being over leveraged, right? There's no other reason that could happen. When number goes up, how could you lose money if you're bullish, right? And the answer is using too much leverage. Yeah. And yeah, I think there's a big kind of disconnect of where people are like, if you think Bitcoin's going to 200K and you're risking your entire Bitcoin stack from 10 to 12K, I'm just like, I'm shaking my head being like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, there's no world where that makes any sense. And I mean, it's the same, obviously, if you're like betting on a 30% retrace before 100K and you're betting everything on that, right? I mean, that's just crazy. But for some reason, like, it keeps on happening. People are just like, this has to happen. And once it does happen, like once you get this big pullback, I'm going to get on board and then just mega moon it. But yeah, you have these kind of two things where people are like over leveraged, and then other people are like, okay, I think this has to happen. This pullback has to happen. So I'm going to play it very aggressively to make more. And what it ends up being is you're being greedy and you feel like you deserve more than you have, but you don't really. Like, you have to work for what you get. And if you're just trying to cheat your way into it by using high leverage, there's a good reason that you're just going to lose it all eventually. So that is kind of my view on it. But a lot of people disagree, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, we've made some progress on our guide. Not going to show the whole thing, obviously. We've started it. There's work being done. And it looks like it's going to be quite long. I don't know. We haven't discussed this even personally, but we're, I don't know, at this rate, kind of 50, 60 pages-ish, it kind of looks like. Yeah. And this will answer a lot of those questions that people have about. I mean, look, the intention of this document that we're writing, which is going to take some time. We've got some really smart people proofreading it as well, which is going to make it so much better, but also a massive pain in the ass, kind of debating the minutiae with them, which is going to be great. But the point, or the final, the desired outcome of this is, if you have any questions about just margin trading, futures trading, leverage trading, etc., or if your friends have questions, or there's a section you don't understand, or just something you don't get, you have more or less a broad base kind of go-to document to go and learn something, or to at least to point you in the right direction for further research. As we mentioned, it's going to be completely free, so just give us some time to work on that. This is just a bit of a kick up my own arse, Duck, I'm using to get back to work on this thing after taking a couple of days off. But yeah, this will be a good. I mean, look, just generally, if you can't explain to yourself why you're using leverage, or if you don't have like a very detailed understanding of the product or instrument that you're actually trading, just stop, I guess. Stop and figure it out, because I think there's a presumption that everyone, or that a lot of participants have, that they have to use these tools, whereas in many cases it might not even be appropriate for them or for their style of trading or for their whatever investment mandate. So that's something worth considering as well. So yeah, I think that says plenty for Bitcoin up until it stops going up or something changes on the higher time frames. I don't know if you have any levels up here that you find particularly compelling. I mean, the last one that I was willing to punt was that daily absolute crap fest red candle, and I did that with great reluctance. But I don't really have anything else that jumps out or stands out with where we are now. Do you?
No, for me, it's kind of like, I mean, it's a meme, right? But if we get like a 30-40% pullback, I think there's going to be a trade there. And if we don't, I'm just going to be happy watching it go up. Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's kind of like, it's not a question of, I haven't been in the Bitcoin trade for a while, so, shit, I should be. It's more of, okay, do I find a good trade to be had? And if I don't, I just don't have to. I mean, there's nothing more chill than just sitting there watching it go up. So yeah, I don't really see much reason. Like, if I'm not getting a good trade, I don't want to take a trade. Personally, I mean, and there are possibilities out there, or like opportunities in the altcoin space, which I've been taking. Be it long or short. I think on the short side, it's been a little bit easier on the altcoins. But there's even long opportunities there. So I think, like, I don't need to trade aggressively, kind of get in this mindset of, okay, Yeah, I have to be in a trade 24/7 if
And
the
you
market.
technically are, right? In a net
Yeah,
net
yeah,
position. So that's another thing. I think people forget because of how popular futures are, etc. That again, most of you are like always in a trade, literally 24/7 long. So if you're kicking yourself for not being longer than long, then I don't know. It's just, give yourself a bit of a break. Something I've argued previously. Um, and yeah, another point being that if you're really bullish Bitcoin but can't get long that thing, a lot of the time that bullishness is at the expense, not directly, but at the expense of or inversely correlated with altcoin strength. And we're very privileged in 2020, 2021 that altcoins, the Bitcoin pairs less so, but generally being able to trade altcoins without holding the underlying and futures and all that type of stuff. Just altcoin trading is pretty accessible, pretty liquid for the most part, right? So if you want to express that bullish Bitcoin view outside of Bitcoin, a lot of the altcoins have just kind of died. And so there's that side of the market to be played if you're uncomfortable just being net long Bitcoin, or if you want to trade on leverage and you're not comfortable doing it up here. There are, as the Duck mentioned, other opportunities. Two interesting things. The first is I've kind of put up now more or less what we have in the newsletter in Technical Roundup as our Bitcoin levels. And as you can see, the number goes up. On the way up, we form these lower time frame or kind of less established levels, but levels nonetheless. And if it just keeps going up and then forms like a range here, we'll add that, and that's sort of our trend following TA approach, if you will, for the time being, making do with the levels the market gives us. Especially if it wants to use them this well, then we'll keep mapping them. I will say though, if you haven't subscribed to the Technical Roundup over the last couple of weeks, the new format is really good, and it's like an actual newsletter now. It's shorter. There's the whole thing basically gets rewritten every single week. So if you were looking for a newsletter that's actually a newsletter, we're pretty proud of the new version, and the feedback's been really good as well. We also tweeted it out a couple of weeks ago. So if you don't want to go through the email portion and see what the new format looks like, you can kind of go there and look at that. But yeah, and the second thing is, it's funny because we've got few in our call log. The meeting name or whatever, the first bit is whatever. Classic Twitter meme. Yeah, that's that's kind of that. I want to talk about ETH. I know you do as well. The USD pair for me is I'm not hugely fond of these levels up here, as you know. It's like there's monthly and weekly, like we can start looking for something around the previous all-time high, but the levels aren't as clear as they were elsewhere, right? In terms of confluence and just generally, as stated elsewhere, with Bitcoin, we've been rewarded by giving precedence to newer structures as they kind of evolved on the way up. So more recent ranges, supports, etc., rather than looking all the way back, even before especially after, but to some extent even before the all-time high. And I think ETH is sort of following something similar, where more recent breakout levels and price action as it is now is a bit more useful and a bit more instructive than, even though there's no all-time high yet, the levels that are left in the way just aren't that great. I know I say that looking like a complete hypocrite, given I've got this quarterly level at, where is that, 750s, literally the highest close on the monthly or the quarterly, and that's resistance at the moment. But generally, following this daily market structure has been much easier. So with ETH, look, if you look at ETH BTC, which I think the Duck mentioned that it's been the guiding thing, every time it's just been weak, right? ETH BTC looks like crap for the time being. So when Bitcoin popped up, ETH would do nothing or bounce less significantly, and then Bitcoin pulled back, ETH pulled back twice as much, right? So the only real trade that was more or less available on the ETH side is a really tough one, and one that is pretty hard to pursue, which is timing the Bitcoin pullbacks and kind of shorting ETH instead, or as you mentioned, using it as a kind of altcoin proxy. The only thing I'll say for the USD pair is, generally, as long as market structure remains intact on the daily time frame, and it's been pretty decent as an indicator so far. We've got high, low, kind of higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low. And so if we start to pull back from here, then as long as we get some sort of higher low near the breakout level, right, or some sort of retracement structure, if we go from the most recent low to the most recent high, you know, the market structure video, not going to repeat the whole thing. As long as generally that sequence remains intact and no lower low is made, I'll continue to be positive. But that in itself, looking at ETH BTC, doesn't mean you long ETH per se. And with ETH BTC itself, I've only got really two levels that are important. One is the one we discussed on Monday and they're going to discuss on Monday again. This swing high, highest close that has acted as fantastic resistance recently. That was your breakout point, turn to support, turn to resistance. And on the way down, there are kind of only two areas that I find reasonably useful. One is the lowest close before this kind of moon up, which falls around here. And then, honestly, after that, more or less the double bottom, which rests at this swing point. But for the time being, I mean, it's hard to be constructive on the price action. We talked about this before the call started, right? If you've been paying any attention to the books, to the tape, or to the charts generally, it's been really hard to be bullish ETH looking at the ETH BTC pair and having all three of those pairs on your screen as well. And for the time being, we had a nice bounce off of the level on like a really strong leg down, but that bounce pretty much achieved nothing because it resulted in a bearish retest, so now it's kind of retraced at least half of that alt season candle, if you will. So yeah, ETH, until this chart looks better, even if the USD chart keeps going, like by definition, it's a less attractive long than being long Bitcoin. So that's kind of my view for now. What do you think?
Yeah, let me screen share. So in general, with this ETH situation, with the altcoin generation, with this entire
is that your punk rock band?
That would work.
It would work.
But no, with this situation with ETH, right? What I think is happening, and I mean, I have solid basis to think that because I've been doing it myself, is that you see Bitcoin go up, right? And then you see the weaker pairs like the altcoins like ETH, highly liquid, and Link for me personally has been the one where I'm just like, okay, whenever I feel uncomfortable with Bitcoin, but I don't want to short in this strong trend, I just short ETH instead. And that's been working, or like in my case, it's not been ETH, but Link, because I think Link is just basically an even weaker ETH. I think that's happening on a relatively big scale where people are just like kind of taking risk off of Bitcoin by just kind of looking at the altcoins and taking risk off that way. And then you have the opposite side of that trade where people are looking at Bitcoin and they're like, Bitcoin's at 30K now. I don't want to buy Bitcoin at 30K. I much rather buy ETH at 700, right? So these people are buying ETH and then they're complaining that it's not going up. What you're essentially doing if you're buying these altcoins is you're buying Bitcoin and then you're subjecting yourself to the ratio between Bitcoin and that altcoin that you bought, right? So if Bitcoin goes up, the USD pair goes up, because like for some reason, a lot of my friends and a lot of my colleagues have been looking at ETH and like at least in the last, like in the recent weeks. And I mean, you can look back, like ETH's been doing pretty poorly for, 3 months now. If you go all the way back to the high, 4 months. And they're looking at the USD pair and they're like, yeah, this is going up, this is great, right? But what you don't realize is that you're underperforming Bitcoin by quite a bit, right? And by longing ETH, you have the same kind of Bitcoin risk that you would have if you long Bitcoin, right? It's just much harder to long Bitcoin at 29K. So what happens is people long ETH instead of Bitcoin, and then they get hedged into by other people that kind of understand that the altcoins are just acting a little bit weird, weak and weird. So you kind of get this situation where both sides can get squeezed, right? So for example, like if you hedge this, if you hedge on, you short ETH USD to hedge a Bitcoin position, and then you get this kind of bounce, right? You get squeezed out, and that's happened multiple times. But in general, this is downwards trend, right?
Yeah.
At least for the short term. So what happens is these hedging people get short squeezed out, and then it continues to go down. And so essentially, if you're buying ETH at 700, what you're doing is you still take risk on for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's just driving the market like single-handedly. But you also subject yourself to this ETH BTC ratio, which is bearish right now anyway. That could change, and I hope it does, because I mean, altcoin markets, when they're trending upwards, are much more fun to trade than when they're trading downwards. But I mean, like, a lot of people have been just ignoring this, and it's just like looking at the ETH-USD pair.
Agree.
And then it's just like, okay, this goes up, so I'm happy. But I think, like, for the most part, if you've been longing ETH-USD, you've taken on more risk than by longing Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin is quite high. And then you have essentially underperformed by quite a bit. I mean, it's 26%. And don't get me wrong, I think ETH's actually performing much, much better than your average altcoin. I mean, if you just look at Link, the crowd favorite.
Of course you can. Yeah, I was going to say.
I mean, and the reason why I keep on hammering on Link, right, is because, I mean, one, I'm a petty person. I got so much shit for talking badly about Link, like for expecting that this cycle would end, and it did. But two, it's also just one that pretty much everyone kind of trades. Everyone kind of had a position or has a position still. So it's highly relevant. And I mean, if you compare that to ETH, right, the best kind of way to do it, if you really want to go there, is just charting it against it. And you can kind of see how massively this underperformance has been. Like, ETH's not really weak against altcoins, it's just weak against Bitcoin. So, like, for me, even though I'm like, okay, ETH BTC is bearish, I think it's actually holding up quite well in comparison to the other altcoins. Because, I mean, if you compare Link with ETH, it's still underperforming really hard. And I mean, it's pretty much the case for every other altcoin out there. So ETH's overperforming the other altcoins, but obviously massively outperformed by Bitcoin. And I think it's been the same kind of thing where people get excited about every single bounce on the altcoins, which, I mean, to be fair, the fun thing about this entire thing is that oftentimes Bitcoin tops out and then goes sideways, and then you have ETH still like moving down here, and then you get an ETH BTC squeeze and it goes down. That's obviously exciting because you kind of can play the laggard from time to time. But the thing is, like, the fact that it's lagging already means that you shouldn't necessarily be trading that pair, but the other pair is much more interesting. So my view on ETH is just that I need to see it reclaim levels ASAP, because I think this really starting to look really bad. Like, this is pretty much my last support that I have. Mm-hmm. If this fails, I think that could go anywhere from below this level to all the way,
like the bottom of the
easily
range, right?
down here. So yeah, I mean, this could easily, like, if we lose this level anywhere in here, I would not be surprised about new lows. I would be surprised if we see that anytime soon. But I could see, like, if that gets lost, this level, anything between this, I wouldn't be surprised. So for me, I just hope we hold the level and then reclaim again, because then I can actually play the altcoins, because I've talked about this before.
Is up 22%. Don't know what you're on about.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just like trading these 2% low time frame moves, there's some edge to be had there. I still think that. But the problem is that, like, macro, if you're trading anything bigger time frame, you're just getting beaten and beaten by the market, and that's been happening constantly. And the thing is, like, most people are exchanging their Bitcoin for these altcoins, right? And then, I mean, ETH is even going up against USD. But if you compare this to other altcoins that have not been as fortunate, I mean, Nano, one of the last cycle favorites, I mean, you've missed the entire rally, right? And
yeah, it's like, oh, he's bullish crypto, right? Is this the old meme I always post? That someone is like bullish crypto and all their friends are like, oh, he's bullish crypto, Bitcoin's up so much. Meanwhile, he's got like just all in shit coins with no actual exposure to Bitcoin, so his portfolio is like flat or down while the market's doubled.
And I mean, that is painful. That is really painful. And something I tweeted about yesterday or the day before is that capitulation of these things, it's not going to happen. Like, you look at this chart, this person is going to feel pain because they missed the entire bull run, right? If you've held this from December 18th to now, you've missed all the upside, right? But it's still excusable in your mind, right? That's just how human psychology works.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, you didn't really lose money, right? Yeah, you lost Bitcoin, but you didn't really lose money. But where it really gets painful, right, is you missed the entire bull run because Bitcoin basically did this, and you're still trading down here.
Yeah.
Where it gets really painful is if Bitcoin actually pulls back. I mean, this is a little bit of an aggressive pullback, but you get the point. This is going to do this as well, right? Because, I mean, it's just how these markets work, right? If you get a pullback on Papa Bitcoin, the altcoin is very, very likely also going to pull back.
Yeah.
So that's where people start capitulating. And in general, the only kind of way where you get significant upside on the altcoins in recent history anyway has been altcoin capitulation. And I mean, that is something that I think that is still very, very possible. And with that in the cards, right? Let's say Bitcoin puts in a blow off top here from 30 to 40K, or like in like one or two candles. We all know how this would look like on the altcoins, right? It's very possible that this candle would still be red if Bitcoin went to 40K this second. Or it's not even very possible, it's very, very likely in my opinion. And I think then you get the capitulation coming into the altcoins. And that's why I can't really be too excited, even though like ETH's coming into support. Because this looks kind of fine still compared to like Nano, which I just showed you. And I can show you the Bitcoin pair chart. And I mean, then you can kind of see the carnage that's been happening.
Jeez,
But in general, the altcoin market is kind of correlated, right? So if you see all these altcoins lose their support, there's a good chance that ETH is going to do it as well. I'm not going to bet on it. I don't want to short much while Bitcoin's trading significantly above all-time high. I've shorted enough of Link and that kind of stuff and I mean, in general, I can't anymore because it's the first now, and Germany is kind of screwing with the ability to short this stuff. But yeah, I think
you just get screwed, right? Because like if you're bullish, what you're holding underperforms other stuff that's bullish, especially the so-called risk-free rate of just holding Bitcoin. And then if the market pulls back, you get fucked harder than if the degree to which Bitcoin pulls back. So your upside is less and your downside is greater, right? It's just it's the worst of both worlds in terms of the relationship it has at the moment with these instruments. I still think like if you have something really clear, something really asymmetric, etc., on an alt USD pair, and you're a linear futures maximalist, etc., I won't tell you not to trade it, but I think just phrasing or contextualizing things in comparison to Bitcoin, especially now, makes sense. More than ever. I mean, look, if you told me that argument was wrong, when let's say Ethereum was leading to a large extent, then I'd be more open-minded. Or if Bitcoin was just doing nothing and alts were popping left, right, and center, I would also agree. But in a Bitcoin-driven market, not looking at the altcoin Bitcoin pair, just seems pretty unreasonable on its face. I think that's always been the case, but there are points in the market cycle where it becomes less apparent and also becomes more apparent. This is one of those where it just pays to look at how you're doing against the so-called index, right? And that's what it is ultimately. Like, and that's why if you go to any 2017, 2018 Twitter threads, etc., most people will tell you that altcoin Bitcoin pairs, the only means or the only purpose of those altcoins for the most part was to just accumulate more Bitcoin. And the whole up in USD thing was a famous meme because if you underperformed Bitcoin, then the altcoin didn't actually have a USD cash out. So the up in USD was a meaningless measurement, but also it was still a bad outcome because you would have done better by just holding Bitcoin in the first place. So that's something worth bearing in mind. I want to touch on the privacy coin stuff, and also if we can get this video to 100 likes, that would be absolutely awesome. Thank you to everyone who's hung out with us so far. We'd appreciate your support in that form. Something I want to talk about with regard to privacy coins is that Bittrex earlier delisted some stuff, right? I think it was XMR, Zcash, and Dash will be removed. And then interestingly, Zuko tweeted about an hour ago saying, and he's obviously the like Zcash founder or whatever, core developer, founder. I think he's the founder, right?
Yeah.
He tweeted saying, I really like Gemini and Coinbase. Damn, those are high quality operations, right? So something a bit tongue in cheek with regard to the delistings on Bittrex, maybe suggesting that those may be isolated to Bittrex and not spread over to other exchanges, maybe a bit more confident in their position there. What do you think of the delistings or just privacy coins generally? Do you think this can drag other altcoins, or is it more or less an isolated case? Any immediate reactions to this kind of stuff?
I mean, in my opinion, right, and I've said the same thing about XRP. Even though like a lot of people are like, yeah, XRP is not a cryptocurrency, like that's not gonna make people afraid of altcoins, right? But that's just wrong. Like you hear about something in the crypto sphere get taken down like that, you're gonna get a little bit worried, right? So your risk appetite as someone that doesn't really know about the market is gonna be less. And then, I mean, if we now start to see like privacy coins get delisted, I mean, there's a big chunk of stuff that is privacy related in the crypto space. So, yeah, I think that's going to reduce kind of the confidence of people in altcoins because, I mean, most people kind of assume, and I think that's a relatively sane assumption that Bitcoin is not going to get taken down like that. Then why take the additional risk when you have this kind of stuff going around, right? So, for example, if it's just XRP that is going to get taken down, that's one thing. If we now start to see more coins get taken down, that makes people worry, right? Because then you don't know where it's going to stop. I'm not entirely sure if every kind of exchange is going to delist these privacy coins. I doubt it that's going to be like in the very near future. But I mean, it's always been kind of the main risk of these altcoins, right?
Yeah.
Of these privacy coins. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for governments to go against privacy coins because, I mean, that's basically like you're hiding stuff for better or worse, and governments don't like that. So I'm not surprised that that's happening. But, I mean, it doesn't make holding the coin much more bullish, right? Like, for example, when I'm hearing that, and I'm just speculating on the price of Zcash, I'm obviously going to sell because, I mean, I don't really, like, if I'm not using it, and most people aren't, I'm just there to speculate on it. And that is obviously something that is not necessarily bullish for price. We've seen squeezes after delistings before, like squeezes up. So I wouldn't be like immediately like, okay, Zcash, for example, is going to zero. Even more because Bittrex isn't really the most important exchange. Hasn't been for a long time. But yeah, I mean, for me, it makes no sense to touch privacy coins right now. Like, I wouldn't want to touch anything that has any. Like, I was thinking of buying Grin, for example, on this dip. I mean, I've tried before, didn't get. Like, I tried to get some OTC, didn't manage to fill. No one wanted to sell to me. I mean, look at the KuCoin pair because that's
the supply crisis, bro. No one's selling.
Yeah. But yeah, so Grin went up afterwards by quite a bit, and then has been dumping the last 2 weeks. And I mean, I was thinking about getting into that, and then I see this kind of stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to take that risk because the moment you get like these kind of delistings, liquidity disappears too, right? So you have an even harder time getting out, and then you think otherwise. And I think that's the case for a lot of other altcoins as well. One thing that I want to mention in general is a lot of people are always like, yeah, you don't look at the coins that are doing exceptionally well when you're saying altcoins are bearish, right? For example, DOT has been doing really well. I think the altcoins that have been doing well are the ones that are not really owned by too many people. It's kind of the same story over and over and over again. Like, my main reason for being bearish Link was because I've said and thought everyone that's going to own Link has bought Link now, at least with the current like landscape that we have, right? We don't really have too many new players entering the altcoin market. And then I thought, okay, Link's just a lot of people have Link, and I don't think there's more demand than there's actually going to be selling pressure because of that. And then Link's underperformed since then. And DOT, for example, not many people were talking about it in a bullish sense. Now it's going up. Now more people own it. I don't know when that's gonna stop, but like it's kind of like this back and forth where people FOMO into coins and then get wrecked, and then cycle into the next one and they get wrecked. And it's always the ones that no one seems to hold, and it's kind of funny. So for me, that's kind of like for example, my Litecoin case, like where I was bullish Litecoin, I was like, no one's holding Litecoin, and then Litecoin suddenly outperformed really heavily. It's not outperforming anymore, and I think the reason why is because privacy coins are not doing too well, right? So Litecoin wants to implement Mimblewimble. Mimblewimble kind of moves in the privacy world, so you have Litecoin not doing too well anymore. So like this kind of stuff has wider reaching impact than you would think, and like if you don't really know like what is what, there can be pitfalls where it's just like, okay, I bought this coin and it didn't even realize it was a privacy coin, and now you have this announcement that they're getting delisted and I'm getting screwed over. It's a dangerous time to be holding altcoins when you get delistings based on regulatory stuff, in my opinion.
I think it also raises the point that we discussed, that we end up discussing every week, that if you have a market where Bitcoin number go up and altcoins are in a tough spot, right, or at least the majority of them, or the most accessible ones, or the indexes, ETH, BTC, like altcoins as a whole haven't been strong. That's why people come into the chat and bring up, with no disrespect, like for the most part, exceptions to the rule, right? Like we can find 50 at a glance that have taken a shit or like inversely correlated to Bitcoin, and then there are one or two runners or whatever that perform well for that day or for that shorter period, right? And that, firstly, that kind of supports the point made in the beginning that I still think the alt season windows are just going to get are going to fizzle out for the most part, and the majority of good altcoin trading will have to be just in those smaller windows, not in the seasonal sense that everything goes up, but in a more kind of surgical, like specific outperformance within a basket, within a sector, etc. So I think that's an important consideration when considering punting these things.
And with regard, someone said, Litecoin is not a privacy coin. Yes, the thing is, like, you don't really, how crypto works in general, right? You kind of think about what you're trading, and then you think about the kind of most fitting narrative at that moment. And even if it doesn't make much sense, right? Like, for example, you could, Litecoin, the first connection that you make nowadays is Mimblewimble, right? And then the first connection you make with Mimblewimble is its privacy. So it doesn't really matter if that's true or not. If people think that way, they're just going to sell. And traders like we are just going to kind of, like, that's the funny thing. Sometimes it pays to not know what's going on, or like not know it at a deep level, because you really only have to expect or like know what the other traders are doing and what they're expecting, right? So you see a narrative coming like that, and you just act before them, and it doesn't really matter if that narrative is going to be true or not, because as long as that narrative exists, it's probably going to play out, at least in the short term, right? And that's kind of like, at least that's how I like to trade. Like I don't like to kind of make these like super detailed, in like you make these plans and then you kind of read into it too much, and you get out traded by a person that has no idea what they're doing. Like this, I don't know if you guys seen this 80 IQ, 120 IQ kind of meme. It's literally true for the crypto markets, where when you kind of making smart assumptions based on facts, right? But like not like giga brain assumptions, then you get wrecked, right? And if it's just like, okay, this narrative is there and it makes sense to go up, like this just a nonsensical narrative that you sometimes have, and it's gonna go up, and it goes up, right? And then you have the even smarter people that are like, okay, this narrative is gonna make people buy. Doesn't really matter if the narrative is true or not. I'm just gonna play the narrative,
exactly. And the more accessible it is, the less technically complex. A lot of the time, it just works so much better. I don't know how much you remember specifically of the 20s, probably a lot, because you just didn't sleep that year. But in 2017 especially, like the best narratives were the shortest ones. Like Neo, Chinese Ethereum, boom, million X, right?
Yep.
And there's another one. Was it Quantum? That was like Korean Ethereum.
Yep.
I mean, come
ICX.
on.
ICX.
Yeah, ICX is like whatever.
It was
Like, there's
ICX,
so many of them. But literally, from memory, the altcoins which did incredibly well had those. It doesn't even need to be based on reality, right? It just needs to be credible and
It was
understandable.
never.
No, if
Neo. I mean, I can talk about Neo for an hour, and Neo back then was shit. Like, a good friend of mine was just like a good friend of mine is really, really like a genius programmer, right? And he was into Bitcoin like way, way back. He really liked it. Looked into ETH, liked it. And then I told him about my Neo investment back then, and he was like, "Oh, this sounds really nice. I'm gonna look into it." And then he looked into it for a day, and he was like, "Holy shit, get out of there! This is complete trash." And that was in 17, and it's literally just pulled a 10, no, more than a 10x. I think it was like a 50x or something in general back then. And I was like, no, this narrative is gonna at least sustain for a little bit longer. But it really didn't matter. Like the tech behind it. It just doesn't matter.
XVG
the narrative
as well,
is
right?
the
It's
thing
like
that matters.
it's a giga shit coin. Like Verge is a mega shit coin. Dogecoin Dark, but it was like one of the best performers when altcoins went mental, just because you had fucking John McAfee basically mega shilling it, and then all this other crap. It just ultimately doesn't matter. I think that'll go away a bit. I do think there'll be a bit of a sharper eye required towards these altcoin narratives, are treated with a bit more skepticism and will require more credibility, etc. But I still think the general point of at least making those narratives, even if they are more complex, dilutable and accessible, that will be to the benefit of those projects. So even if there is more technical complexity to them, they'll be better off if that can be basically packaged up and put on a retail plate in a way that looks good. Also, just very quickly, Paul asked earlier, and I've seen like this tweet got like 600 likes from someone about like Tether being a security and all this other crap. That specific statement that stablecoins can be considered securities. So Paul's comment is SEC wrote that stablecoins can also be considered securities, especially Tether. I don't think that was part of the statement, but whatever. Any thoughts? The SEC was quite clear, and what they said was actually super boring, which was that if your stablecoin functions as a security, then it's a security, which is the most kind of obvious legal self-defining whatever thing ever, right? That if you call an instrument X but actually functions as a security, then we're going to regulate it and treat it as a security. That doesn't mean that Tether or another stablecoin is going to be like, deemed to be a security or whatever. It's just it's weird. I think people are almost looking for FUD at this point to justify God knows what. Not accusing Paul, of course. But I just hate seeing those tweets get a ton of engagement and people just can't. It's nothing to do with even the legal background. Can't kind of just read English to understand what's being written about. I saw like FX Street share the same thing as well, like, to invest SEC looking into Tether. I'm like, the fuck are you on about? That's not the case at all. So just had to get that.
I mean, does it even make sense for the SEC to go after stablecoins? Aren't there like a million other agencies?
It wouldn't be the appropriate regulatory agency for it. Like if we're talking about we're talking about some heavier hitters. Than the SEC. If you have some real kind of, if someone's trying to take the dollar away from the US and they want to do something about it, they won't use the SEC.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, so it's just I thought a point worth making.
Something I want to clarify on the narrative kind of bit, because it always sounds like when I'm saying that or when we're saying that, it doesn't really matter what a coin does fundamentally. I don't think that's true. I think the reason why ETH has been outperforming is because it's a relatively solid project. So as an investor, right, you need to know, okay, is this good or is this bad, right? The short-term narrative as an investor doesn't really matter too much. It's obviously nice to get like a good entry, but like these kind of things that we're talking about, like this narrative, that's going to go for a month or 2 or 3 in the current market. And that can be like a significant price change, but it's not going to influence the longer term direction of something. So if you're just kind of like looking to invest in something, it's not something that you have to be concerned too much about. But if you're looking at something for a trade, you obviously have to. So there's a big difference there, because it always sounds like, oh yeah, only the narrative matters. For a trader with like a limited time, like I want to be in a coin for no longer. I mean, I feel bad if I was in a coin longer for a month than a month, like in an altcoin. Just don't want to be in an altcoin for so long, because the risk gets exponentially higher. I mean, if you just think about like Zcash and Monero, where you just get bad news and it's just, okay, I buy your position, right? You don't want to be in that kind of position. So for me, there's always a time limit, and those narratives always play out in that kind of time frame. So for me, those are really important. But I mean, it's not necessarily something for an investor to look out for, in my opinion.
There you go. I think the logic is applicable to stuff like Ripple in the current environment. Like that whole state of affairs is probably going to just take a while to sort out, right? And like, where is it going to?
Yeah.
It's been delisted in a lot of places. What form is the legal procedure going to take? Are they going to just fight out the whole thing, settle? If they do settle, do exchanges relist Ripple, that sort of stuff? Or XRP, sorry, not Ripple, because they're so different, right? Oops. But at the end of the day, like, if number go up, Bitcoin good, and other altcoins just don't have that risk. And we even wrote about it in Technical Roundup. You end up in a shitty position where even if you're right, maybe you have to forcibly close your position because it gets delisted, right? So just kind of putting the odds against you by almost looking for altcoin outliers just in the opposite direction that make it extra hard to A, outperform Bitcoin, and B, trade them correct directionally, etc., etc. Just don't make things harder than they need to be. I think if there's this kind of regulatory stuff surrounding it, or delistings especially, which kind of directly affect your ability to speculate, that sort of stuff just sucks and makes things unnecessarily difficult in a market that's notoriously easy to fuck up if you make things far too complicated, or more complicated than they need to be, at least.
I think in general with the altcoins, something that I'm more scared about than missing, like, let's say you position yourself aggressively, which I think is fair, right? If you see a window and you position yourself aggressively, that's fair. But something I fear much more than that is like positioning myself aggressively, and then it dumps, and I have to make hard decisions at support, or like below support where I would initially want to buy, right? Because the worst thing that can happen is you have like a thesis for something, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be really good here, but I'm just gonna FOMO buy, and then it goes where you wanted it to go in the first place, and then you're already in distress, and you're like, what do I do? And that kind of situation is the worst, because then you make really dumb decisions. So for me, something I've always maintained for the altcoins, like, they have to really make it so that I want to be buying them. And then they also have to have an invalidation for me that makes it really easy, or be so ridiculously oversold. And I mean, I'm not talking about RSI, but like when you see like communities abandon the project for reasons that have nothing to do with the project. So I mean, we've seen ETH, for example, go down below $100, right? And then you had like people in the community of ETH being like, "Oh shit, we screwed up. This is going nowhere." But really, not much had changed. Like the recent kind of price drop didn't really change. Like ETH was the same at 500 before it went to 80.
It's one of my favorite memes, though, right? Depending on volatility, you're just like, oh, the fundamentals have never been worse, or the fundamentals have never been better, depending on how price moves.
And I mean, the thing is, it's not true for XRP right now, right? Like the fundamentals for XRP have never been worse.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a fact, right? But this is not the same for these altcoins. Like a lot of these altcoins have been trending down a lot. The fundamentals haven't really they're not really much worse than they were before. So when I see panic in that kind of situation, I like to buy it if it gets really aggressive. I don't like to buy like kind of sideways movements on altcoins against Bitcoin when they're in a very bearish trend. And everyone else kind of can buy if they want to, and there's not really that much emotion going in the market. Like altcoins get really interesting once you actually have a lot of emotions in the market. Be it, okay, I'm losing so much money, I just want to get out. And there's something that we saw in 17 where people were just like, I don't even care if it goes up. I just want to be rid of it, never to think about it again. And that was literally the bottom. Like I still remember XRP in 17. That was one of my most, like one of my best trades, just based on how I approached it. I was looking at the XRP subreddit on Reddit, and they were like, when you look at the XRP chart, and I can show like a longer time frame one, they were coping all the way down, right? They were like, XRP is the greatest thing ever, and it dropped and it dropped and it dropped, and it kind of bounced here, and everyone was euphoric again. And then it did these last 3 cans, and they don't look too big.
And that's 3 weeks, or like what? That's a whole month of dumping.
Yeah,
right?
It's a whole month of dumping, and it's like 70% down, right, in those 3 weeks. And that is where people were like, okay, dude, this has cost me so much mental energy that even if this goes up, and I still could see it go up, I don't want to have it anymore because it drains me.
It's
and
like
that
a life burden. Forget finance, right?
Yeah, it's just like, dude, just leave me alone. I don't want to think about it ever again, right? And that was the sentiment that made me like, okay, this with the drop, where people were just like, okay, I'm just going to sell and never think about it again. That's kind of something that I look forward to. And then what we have right now is kind of like this complacency all around, where people are just like, yeah, the altcoins are just going to do well. They're just going to take some time. And it's not necessarily the climate that I want to buy. Could we be at the bottom for the altcoins? Obviously, yeah. It's always there's always a chance of that. It's just for me, kind of like the opportunity. I think there's going to be better opportunity for myself, and I don't have any problem buying into like a significant pump, which. I mean, we're at low enough prices where you could see these altcoins bounce quite a bit. Like, I mean, Litecoin is down against Bitcoin by 80%, and it's one of the ones that is down the least. So, I mean, yes, you could see a lot of like big bounces, and I'm fine with buying into those, but I'm not fine buying into basically chop.
Yeah. Hopefully, I might have to write about it on Tuesday if it just fades into irrelevance. There are 2 things I want to bring up, or maybe a good point to round off as well. And both are coping mechanisms, which I think people do well to avoid. And they're somewhat related. The first is that you will get, if just a quick scroll through Twitter, dozens of people, of course after the fact and when the market's green, never when it's red, will be telling you to trade the trend, right? This kind of endless wisdom, again, especially when it's easy to do so and you can't get an entry, like when the market's just full green. They'll tell you to trade the trend and make you feel stupid for not trading the trend. They'll do that for Bitcoin when it's bullish, but they won't do it for altcoins when it's bearish, right? Yeah. If you take the same people and tell them, okay, well, look at this altcoin against Bitcoin, it's been going down for years, isn't that a bearish trend? They'll kind of ignore you or disagree or whatever, which is stupid. And that applies to ETH BTC at the moment to some extent. I want to be bullish ETH BTC straight up because I think the technicals can look so good. Because a lot of you know that I like to trade where there's space, right? So if we look at, I don't know where all my levels just went. If I just deleted them, I'm going to be really pissed. Hold on.
Oh no.
Oh, whatever. Okay, that's the monthly. Yeah, my levels are gone. No, they're not. Whatever. So ETH BTC, right? The reason I want to be bullish this pair is because if it breaks out, there's a ton of space, right? So we have this weekly level, which is currently resistance, we talked about on stream. Then we have the top of the range, which is where the market last turned, and it's been making kind of lower highs and lower lows since then. But if we get a breakout through this kind of high time frame range, there's absolutely nothing until like kind of 50% higher at the very least, and at that point you've got like a shitty-ish level as resistance. So I'd really like for this to break out, because then there's all of this to capture, not just in ETH, but also, I think I agree with the Duck, in altcoins more generally. This window of outperformance will probably be absolutely mental, and at that point we enter this range, etc., etc. But until it does that, and certainly with how it's looking right now, I mean, yes, I've also got it at support, but until it actually reverses, then that's off the table. So with the trend stuff, it applies to both sides of the market. Don't fade the bullish trend, but also don't stand in front of the bearish trend, even if the short-term candles, the levels reaching into, makes you feel otherwise. And the second coping mechanism I think is useful to maybe warn against, and that's why I said they're related, is people making comparisons with regard to Bitcoin and its all-time high and ETH and its all-time high. Saying like, oh well, Bitcoin, already broke its all-time high, and that's like a thing now, and it's look what's happened. Whereas ETH, it's this much percent away from its all-time high, and then if it's like Bitcoin, it'll just keep going higher. So long ETH. I think that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. For two reasons. One is just look at ETH BTC. if ETH is underperforming Bitcoin, then being long ETH as a kind of catch-up play until the ETH BTC pair turns around just doesn't really make much sense unless you're really buying it at value, whatever that means in this market. And that brings me to my second point, which is in a strongly momentum-driven market, you essentially castrate yourself by longing the laggard constantly. I've been ETH BTC bearish for like some time. Pretty much when Bitcoin started breaking out, the first thing I said was people are going to be looking for... And that was months ago, right? People are going to be looking for the catch-up play in ETH. Don't do it, because ETH BTC looks like a pile of shit. And of course, it's kind of like a replacement for FOMO. Instead of trading Bitcoin on leverage, whatever, it's just FOMO in a thin disguise. You just buy the thing that's gone up less because you feel it's more discounted and you're not late to the party, even though the better trades are the momentum continuation trades in the stronger pair, especially in crypto. Yeah. And we've seen that happen in more recent market cycles, where basically ETH is leading, Bitcoin is kind of being dragged and catches up, and then it's not like Bitcoin eventually just kind of made its way up to ETH and whatever, caught up. It's just when ETH topped, the whole market topped. So you're almost shooting yourself in the foot by A, longing the laggard, but also B, as a result, not paying attention to the one that's leading the market. So your timing's off either way. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So that's just kind of my humble view on those things.
Yeah, I think like in general, to make it kind of easier on people, I mean, just imagine this, right? Like if you're looking at ETH BTC, for example, you have Bitcoin, right? Most people, then I feel like anyway, most people are not sitting there with like a lot of cash that they want to put into the market. But even like if that were the case, just ignore that for a second. Like you have Bitcoin, you want to put it into ETH. What you're essentially doing is you're shorting Bitcoin and you're longing ETH, right? And then you look at Bitcoin pushing new all-time highs. Like you can keep talking about like, yeah, it doesn't make much sense to short into this. And I mean, I've been saying this for, it's been ages now where I've been saying, okay, this is just like this trending up, right? So you don't want to short into it. But if you're buying ETH with Bitcoin, you're basically doing that. You're basically shorting Bitcoin, longing ETH, while Bitcoin is pushing higher, right? So there's a good reason why ETH's underperforming, because I mean, this is just outperforming so hard, and this is just a trending pair, whereas this one obviously isn't. It's trending, but in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like you're taking a trade if you're converting your Bitcoin into ETH, and the trade is you're shorting Bitcoin in a way, and you're longing ETH. And that is like the moment you use those words, makes a lot of like people like, oh, okay, yeah, shit, I didn't even think about it. But I mean, you're obviously selling Bitcoin and you're obviously buying ETH, right? So it's kind of like there has to be a good reason for that. At least, like, I mean, if you're mega bullish ETH and you're not mega bullish Bitcoin, that's a very different kind of scenario where you can just trade or like long the one that you think is just going to outperform. But there's not really any evidence that ETH is going to do that, because I mean, it's just been trending downwards. But so for me, it's kind of like if you're exchanging your Bitcoin into ETH or into any other altcoin, there has to be good reason for it. People tend to be just like, okay, yeah, Bitcoin went up, so it's kind of, it's always when people make a lot of money, they kind of tend to throw it away easier, because sure. I mean, it's just seems like it's been so easy. And I've definitely been kind of I've done that before, where I've just been like, okay, I've made a shitload. I still remember this from back here, where I longed ETH at 80 with like way too much risk. Like that was way too much risk, and then took it all the way to 150, and then took those proceeds and was like, holy shit, I made so much in ETH, I'm just going to play Litecoin now. Because Litecoin is going to catch up. And I still remember like losing several Bitcoin on that Litecoin trade.
Yeah.
And then after closing that Litecoin trade, I was like, dude, I'm such an idiot. Like, this was so dumb. But in that moment, you don't realize because you're on that high of having made so much money. And this was really like, that was the one time. I think I longed Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, and XRP or something, all three.
the dinosaur basket.
Yeah. And I mean, I gave back, like, I didn't give back like significant amounts of money, but I lost, like, I mean, even now, like looking back on it and seeing where Bitcoin is now and just imagining like how many Bitcoin I lost in those stupid trades, just doing that dumb shit. I mean, that's just something that you kind of tend to do when you make a shitload of money. And it cost me a lot of money to kind of learn that.
I actually think even just trading aside, you've come onto something there that's pretty prevalent, that people, a lot of the time, the incentive or the justification, rationalization, whatever, for taking the lagging trade is that people feel the need to kind of outsmart the market, right? Or kind of avoid what's obvious because there's no edge or alpha there. Like, this is going up a lot. Okay, well, all the sheep and all the retail traders are there. But what's the next thing? There is no next thing, right? Like,
or it doesn't have to be anyway.
It doesn't have to be. Or, yeah, even if there is, you don't have to find it to make money, right? I've seen that kind of behavior a lot, where people feel like just because something's moved, they need to get on board something before it's moved to look clever. And it unironically comes back to that very polarizing thing, which is, do you want to be right or do you want to make money? So yeah, look, we've discussed these narratives type of stuff a lot. And 5am says, selling BTC for ETH would be utterly bonkers though. Yes. Well, I mean, that's arguably what a lot of people who end up shifting their allocation are doing by, who are net long Bitcoin by virtue of being in crypto, and then they reduce their Bitcoin exposure to increase their ETH exposure, that they're pretty much long ETH BTC as a result, right? So that process kind of repeats itself in many cases. And again, I want to be a big ETH BTC bull. I've got it in an area of support once again, but I just think the better, easier, or more actionable trade is not to fade weekly market structure, but actually look for some sort of strength and then see how the follow through comes on there. Maybe that'll change when we get our CME futures, right? Coming out in a couple of weeks, I think, on the 18th or something like that. Or maybe it'll have the opposite effect, something we wrote about a couple of weeks ago as well. But yeah, plenty to look forward to. Duck, any final notes on anything really? Given first live stream of the new year,
I think we've talked for long enough. But I really appreciate you coming by, even on the first. I mean,
I have to be
here. A lot of you guys probably have headaches or something, hangovers, whatever. So really appreciate you coming by, regardless, and hope you do that for the next one as well.
Yeah, good points. Happy New Year, everyone. We're grateful for your company. Thank you to Bybit, of course, for providing their support last year and for this year to come, hopefully. If you want to support the live stream and the show, make sure to visit their links in the description below. In terms of content, as ever, you've got me on Monday, the reformed, much better technical roundup on Tuesday, Duck on Wednesday, and then in the next couple of weeks, or few weeks, at some point, the futures trading guide to look forward to as well. Happy New Year, everybody. Hope it starts well, and we will see you next week. Duck, thank you as well, and chat soon.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.